and welcome to another episode of Leadership in the Age of Physical AI. I am so privileged to have our dear friend Nick Shelton back in for another episode. If you haven't listened to the last one, feel free to go in and listen to the last podcast. Nick's such an amazing person. He's one of those few people who understands the world of HR and people, and at the same time has had enough experience with the AI companies, the AI startups, ingrained into the AI ecosystem to understand how the winds of change are coming. And that's and Nick, if possible, that's what we want to focus on today. And for this episode is really the winds of change, right? Will the wave of AI is upon us, and the wave of physical AI is coming in the next couple of years. Us basically being us pushing it and investing in it and working on some of the technologies that will make physical AI a reality for the masses. And one of the things we are working on is this thing called a prototype center, a physical AI prototype center. And with the physical AI prototype center, we want to make sure change management and skills are embedded into the prototype center, because we think that's going to be absolutely critical on how we implement physical AI in the world around us. I'm keen to know your thoughts on this. Talk to the change management, talk to culture. Yeah, go for it.
Well, and you're taking the right approach of understanding change management. I mean, I think that's going to be critical. And I know the last podcast we talked, I think both of us came across as super positive, rosy for, introducing AI. I would say the implementation
The
of
hard
it,
news.
yeah, it's not going to be that rosy. It's going to be rough. I know here in the US, it's already became quite political. It's changing by the day, both sides. And I think that's going to persist. Because there is going to be some drawbacks. And even one thing that I'm seeing in these AI native companies that have adopted that, they are seeing productivity rise through the roofs. They're getting a lot done with a lot less, but we're also seeing a lot less empathy from in the workforce. And by meaning that, I think everybody can see like, oh, when you're used to bossing around AI agents 24/7, having them work, it's sometimes easy to stay in that mode and not realize like, oh, you're actually interacting with a human now, and with your direct reports and that you're kind of like, oh yeah, you should work 24/7 as well. And so that the mentality changes. So I think we were talking about training before. I think we're on need new HR training, just even how to train managers and how in this world where there's going to be a lot of AI agents that you can boss around, just like how do you actually deal with other, your coworkers, and how do you lead with empathy and like make sure that's a part of your culture. So I think that's like critical to understand. The other aspect is like going too far too fast. And I've even seen this of companies that are like, oh, yeah, how much money are we spending on recruiting? And we have all these people like, let's automate that. Let's just have everybody talk to a virtual person. And then it did not go well at all. You can imagine no person was excited about talking to a virtual interview. They didn't take the company seriously and they
Iron
struggled.
sharpens iron.
Yep. And the other aspect of people are like, oh, yeah, well, hiring, it's all about just matching resume and skill sets. And then what most people don't realize, and me having done it in the last decade, keyword matching on a resume, to a certain job description is at most 2% of whether a person's a good fit. I'd say we're mostly highly over X on cultural fit. Sometimes it's situational fit, understanding is a person ready at that stage. Even there's been times in my life where I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to work 18 hours a day. Yeah, I can do that when I'm 23 years old, new to an area. But then there's other times you're like, oh, if you ask me to do that, that's not going to be my cup of tea. So you have to like understand those small things. And there's so many other factors that come in that really only come from building relationships. So that's just an example from a world I know, but you can, you know, put that pretty much any context within a business of like companies are going to index too fast, and it's not going to, there's going to be multiple spillouts that come. And the other aspect, as I said, is making sure the employees are trained. I think there's going to be some that are going to be pro, let's do this all the way, and then some that will be forced. And so it's kind of having to figure out like what's going to be the happy middle and what's going to be the right timing of that. So will be an interesting road ahead. But I think this change management of understanding things, and I know, like, especially when it goes to your world, when you're talking about physical assets, I think you're even giving me examples of, oh yeah, having someone to go 200 miles to an inspection. It's going to be a lot different. It's like, yeah, luckily, hopefully, I don't have to be on call. You can have an agent that can think and react, but there's still got to be a human component. I don't think this is going to change overnight. And right now, no one has that crystal ball. And I'm seeing a lot of businesses pop up are going to be the consultancies that will help these large, massive companies get through that and understand, work with their workforce, work with the tools they have in place, and make sure they're not going too fast. And there is a fallback option.
On the technical side, what we are trying to do is so we're trying to build a sort of a tag team of human agent humans. So while humans are sort of managing the agents have their own sense of leadership, I suppose. And when they are not sure of something, s- to call in a human for help. So we kind of have the last mile of getting things done, especially on physical assets, where you can't leave something at 30% done or 80% or even at 99% done, right? Like if it's not 100% done, you're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments in machinery and equipment that have to, that just have to work. So there's no, so it's a bit of like NASA. Failure is not an option, and so we kind of need the whole chain to work. And this is really important. Like you are going to have friction. You are going to have agents not liking humans, maybe,
Mhm. Yeah.
and humans not liking agents and humans not liking humans, but that we know how to manage humans not liking humans and working and the culture amongst it. But from again coming back to that first principles approach on sort of just human behavior and empathy, I really think the last 10 years, for that matter, ever since the sort of the third industrial revolution, you called it, when electronics came into the picture, and how the pendulum has kind of swung in one direction. And
Mhm.
now we are basically looking at very rigid hierarchical organizations. And, we've had different generations tune it a little bit better, but the fundamentals remain the same. And now we've got to bring the pendulum back the other way in terms of humans really have to be in the forefront. And we have to start at the beginning with humans at the center. We cannot go on this AI, we cannot make AI the center of the future of business, right? So, and people and companies are going to get that wrong. Absolutely, companies are going to get that wrong as well, right? I'm keen to know your thoughts on how to manage that. Like as someone in the in the world of humans, for want of a
Mhm.
better term, and
Yeah.
managing humans. How do we build that from the ground floor, right?
Yeah, and what the I'm wrestling with this in my day to day now, working with these Silicon Valley companies. They're saying like, yeah, there's a shortage of AI talent. There is a war for talent, to some extreme. It is the Metas of the world offering $1 million signing bonuses to all these other startups that just popped up overnight, and they need experts. To one of the questions is like, well, what are the resources we can provide? What we can't match those salaries of the large, big tech companies. And the one thing I start with is saying like, all right, have an education fund, have a continual learning experience, because it's like your best skill, going into this new workforce, is constantly learning, to constantly upskilling your effort. So whether that's paying for online education of various courses, or even allowing for sabbaticals to go back, get a short master's or certification program. And I think we've had some personal conversations to like with the it's changed so much over the years. Our parents, grandparents' generation, if you had a skill, if you went to college or were a professional in a certain skill, you were good for a lifetime. You could have that there. We're at the point of like, all right, you have a skill. Our generation, yeah, you're good for 10 or 15 years. You're going to be great at that. And, you may even be able to get up to a director, executive position, and you're going to be good for the rest of your career. The world we're living in right now, if you're an expert in a skill, that might last 5 years at max. And then there, so, as someone, as if you're going to be looking after your employees, you're like, how are you going to keep getting them better? How are you going to get them upskilling so their knowledge is relevant, and they're not just, stuck in, one particular skill that's outdated, and now they're not ready for their next, challenge. So I think that's critical. And I know you had some more thoughts on like when it comes to first level thinking of how you apply that, and even how you apply it to say your workforce or there.
I also, appreciate the fact that a lot of people are going to be anxious about this, but it's so, and this is fundamentally the job of the leaders, right? Is to kind of train people up to be ready for this, right? It's just like a soccer match. It's a very fluid situation. I'm talking about soccer, right? Actually, we've got the US playing Australia today, so and that's going to be a great analogy. But fundamentally, so you have to play the situation. You have to learn to think on your feet, and some of those skills which were kind of taken out will really has to be put back in. and and this is kind of where I suppose where we've been having conversations, right? Because before we set up this prototype center, we want to basically get these things correct, and train people up on this, on having the right mindset, having the right skill set, bringing more people into this. Because like I said, the economies are going to expand, should expand, not with the AI revolution as much, but when we get to the physical AI side of things, and we will need a lot more people. And so from a country level, at a sovereign level, and from a company level, for you to be competitive, these things really need to be sort of trained. And this is now to your point that you asked me to talk on the first principles. This is where things come in. It's no longer, different education systems from different countries focus on different things. A lot of the education systems treat you to be administrative, so you kind of have a skill for the future. That's while that's still going to be important. I think NVIDIA's Jensen keeps talking on about plumbers and electricians, and those are skills that are not going away. It's going to be even more important because every house is fundamentally going to be a data center. And so having a fundamental understanding of these fundamental traits, they're important. I'm not taking anything away from there. But having said that, what do you mean by first principles, right? What do you understand about how things actually work? How students in every age, STEM, not STEM, arts, crafts, whatever, they going back in history on how things actually work and why we're doing things. And I think whether we like it or not, just with the sort of the last, coming back to the last decade in terms of social media and how, we've had the social media revolution. We've had a section of society that are questioning things, and which is really important. The critical thinking on why we do things and understanding where things come from. That is an invaluable skill set, so going forward. And this is part of first principle thinking, right? I'm doing this because, and I'll give you an example, right? 1999, there was a Swiss air crash, and that fundamentally changed aviation. The reason it changed aviation was it wasn't just another air crash. There were a lot of UN officials on board,
Mhm.
and because of these high profile people, there was a lot more scrutiny on this particular air crash investigation, and they discovered it was basically a fire on board. And most of those sort of investigations would have been, there was a fire on board, there was this material, we should remove this material. That's how it works, right? And because of the nature of it, people actually dug into it, and they realized that they had this fire on the plane, and they flew out over Canada. It was a flight from the US to Switzerland. They flew out into this ocean, and they had 20 minutes where one of the most senior captains in the airline went through a 20-page checklist, and calling an airport back and landing was on page 7 or something, which,
Yeah.
it it's a fundamental common sense, right? But these checklists and how automation has sort of come in, the electronics have come in, because we had to be very rigid in the way we implement automation. Basically meant that you've trained a workforce to be very rigid. And he was the head of training. He was the guy who trained most of the pilots. A very, very, very senior captain. The only reason he was flying was to keep up his pilot license hours. And he went through the checklist step by step by step as he was training other people to do, right? And if he had initially saying, hey, we've got a bad fire on board, what I'll do is, listen, land. We've got an airport not so far away. We land. And then as we sort of doing our approach, we can sort of go through all the other bits and pieces and see if we can, troubleshoot this in the air. Instead of troubleshooting it and then figuring out there's nothing else to do and then trying to land. And they crashed like a couple of kilometers from the airport. So if they had taken that decision even 4 or 5 minutes before, that whole aircraft could have been saved. That fundamentally made a shift in thinking and made things smart, and how we've got to kind of ingrain common sense into how we do things. And that was a paradigm shift in how industry thought about safety and process safety. specifically. And that process safety is going to be very, very, very important for this new age of physical AI, where humans are no longer in charge of the process,
Mhm.
but they've got to critically think about the process and manage the agents doing the process, because the agents will behave exactly like this, how this captain was trained to do, go through the
Mhm.
process.
Yeah.
And we have a burden to kind of critically think, which AI can't do, and which I think AI will never be able to do. We can, so because I think just
Oh,
for
that's
the
a good debate. I can have you other people on the podcast that can debate you on that. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Our capability of thought, it's like what will, I was speaking earlier just on relationships, but I think that our level of thinking, it's not going to be. And I mean, obviously, if you study how these tokens work, how AI is able to do this, you're like, okay, it's interesting, but yeah, it just takes a lot of compute power. We can map it down, and you ask a neuroscience how our mind works. We have it mapped it out to there, and so two different things, and I think that will always allow us to have an advantage there.
because fundamentally, I think it's worth pointing out, and so this is kind of where the fundamental divide comes in, right? In terms of AI, because AI is fundamentally a form of biomimicry, and it's a mathematical form of biomimicry. We did that when we designed the Airbus A380, right?
Hmm.
We designed that when we built the B2 bomber, and we've basically used the same principles to design AI. And so this is kind of where the fundamental mathematical principles behind it do not enable us to kind of for AI to critically think. It can teach you to reason to a certain extent, and this is kind of where and the people who are going to be debating me are going to go, well, we're going to break that mathematical barrier because AI is going to break that mathematical barrier to help reason. I don't buy I don't buy into that,
Yeah.
but happy to be proven wrong, right? Like the way AI is building AI, hey, we might have a very strong reasoning engine, but this is also how we with agents and with how we're building as well. We have these layers of people, or these agents rather, and you have agents on top who are kind of like supervisory agents whose only job is to critically think, and we train them to critically think. But I think humans have an innate ability to kind of think about that, and as the world changes, we fundamentally have the ability to think beyond what that, and I think that's just I think that's just the way the world will go. But sort of just pulling that conversation on, we've got, I mean, it's another great conversation. We just got 10 minutes left, so we might have to get you back for another session.
All right. Well, great. But
But
before we did that, I wanted to actually flip the script, because we briefly mentioned last time we know each other from me writing a book. Before I started off in the business
20
world,
years now.
yeah, I was aspiring author and, yeah, published a couple of books. And one of those books was I was asking people, what is the good life? So very open-ended question, allowed there, and was traveling the world. And I remember
Proud of
you had a
that.
great answer. But now, like you as having one of the best answers, I'm curious, 20 years later, in this world of AI, now that we have this amazing tool, now we have, been able to reason so much more. I'm curious if your answer has changed, and what is the good life for you?
Whoa, that's amazing. I mean, I'm actually excited, right? I'm very optimistic. But then there's always that saying, right? The optimist builds the aeroplane, the pessimist builds the parachute.
Mm.
And I'm sure there's a lot of pessimist people who are building parachutes, but I'm just focused on building the airplane, right? What does it mean? So I've got three small kids. What does it mean for them? What does it mean for me? I'm midway through my career, right? I've easily got another 20 years. So what does it mean for me, right? And, honestly, I see being productivity being a big part of this. And I find that I have, I've got an EA, which is an AI agent, and it's reduced my workload. I've get to focus on things I love. And I'm actually, some of the more tedious work that you have to do, I'm pushing that back to AI.
Mhm.
So it's actually, I'm quite excited about that, and I find that, even for for the kids, I am very, very, very optimistic, because as an entrepreneur I have to be optimistic. Part of the
Mhm.
job description. So otherwise I get fired. So I have to say that. And but on a more realistic note, what I find is that what I find is my ability to spend more time with my family. I am. This is my second startup. And my first startup, I remember the amount of time I had to spend doing administrative work, which I just did not enjoy. And a lot of that is actually now handled by AI. So that makes me, I'm doing things I love. And so we are all the more coming to a world where if we build the structure properly, we are doing things we love. We can focus on things we love without having to, without having to do all of the other stuff that we had to do as a matter of fact. And in sort of, I'm sort of once this gets going in a couple of years, I get to spend more time with the kids. I get to train them on things that I know that AI will potentially never be able to do. They get them to do, you know, get them involved in missions and programs and things that I know otherwise I'd just be a very busy parent and a very busy working dad. So my ability to spend time with my kids and I can see that light and the ability to spend quality time with them. I
Mhm,
think I I think that so for me and in this phase of life, that's my good life, right? And I,
mhm,
I I see AI enabling me to do that. And so that's why I'm quite excited and optimistic. But of course, like like it's like fire. Yeah. Fire
mhm,
can cook your food or you can burn down your house.
mhm,
And AI and Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, he mentioned this almost 10 years ago. He said, we are playing with the next fire. It'll change our lives or it'll burn down our house. And we've got to come together and build a framework, build a scaffolding, build it properly so the fire is contained and it cooks our food, not burn down our house.
yeah. No, I love that. That's, music to my ears, and, even just wrap up because like, we talked about the perils earlier here, and, I think everybody would agree with your answer to the good life. I interviewed over 200 people and themes of family, community. I didn't people say like, "Yeah, you make money," but that was never there, and so I think that resonates with people and understanding, taking time for that. The perils, what I see in the day to day, people, I've been hired as a consultant to say like, all right, what benefits do we need to do? We're a successful AI startup. I even mentioned, I was like, people would love Fridays off. People would love to have less than an 8-hour workday. None of the companies have bought that. And I mean, and I talked to the employees and they said, yeah, it's a blessing and curse, dude. Part of this very successful company, making lots of money, we're building, but we're spending so much time, we've lost what makes us truly human, having a chance to be with your family, spending time outdoors, things that create memories. And so, yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of like, this can be a tool that we use for the ultimate good, or it can be a fire that burns everything that was precious to us down. So, yeah, I love your answer there.
And I think it's about I think it's this is the alliance, right? This is the alliance we're building. We want to kind of bring together a group of like-minded people to build this future, right? And that's why we're seeing the vision. We've got to build a vision, right? There's a lot of bad actors who want to use it in ways that are contrary to what we want, and this is why it's so important to build this alliance and a community around us. So we want to do more. I think there's going to be more work in the future and kind of just focusing on the podcast. But I think a lot of people, I'm sure a part of our audience will be questioning why we've, as a physical AI, we've sort of gone into the space around it. And I think that's more important more than ever right now. And instead of just going on, so we could have sessions after sessions on what a VLA is and what VLMs are and what UNS is and all this cool stuff and robotics and tactile controls and sensors. And they're great. But I think the questions that nobody's talking about is how do you harness it? How do you, because that text, that I don't have to work on that tech.
Hmm.
My agents will build that tech. I've got to figure out how to harness it, how to make it better for humanity. How does it make it better for the community that I live in, I serve, and I work with, and especially for my kids who are growing up in this new world and they learn to kind of live in harmony with the things we're building, right? So they get to do much 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 more, and I think so if you look at our website as well, we've sort of focused a lot more about and kind of not being quirky, but I think Elon is right. We've got to be a multiplanetary civilization. So especially if we do get to colonize Mars, we just don't have enough people, we just don't have enough compute. So we've got to build so much more. We're not building plastic toys anymore, you know
Hmm.
but we're building something bigger, greater, lasting vision, lasting legacy. And for in the history of civilization, where I think we have an opportunity to be part of the civilization that builds the future. And I think we should all embrace it. And I think we should all build an alliance, come together, and make that a reality, right?
Mhm. Love it.
Well, thanks again, Nick. It was wonderful having you. Definitely love to get back.
Yeah.
We'll have you
Always a
back.
pleasure. And yeah, we will have to, there's so many other topics we can address. So I'd love to make it happen sometime soon.
Hopefully next time with Daniel as well, because want to really understand I know he's been busy, but really want to understand the financial world and how finances and capital are basically going into how this works. Because as you know, a big part of, the way we're doing it is involves a fair bit of capital. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the three of us and especially questioning him on how that money is going to flow and
Mhm.
how we're going to make how those investments are going to basically make better world, right?
Yep. So great. Well, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me here and can't wait to see what's next.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. See you next time.